Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing, the Monday edition. I'm Brian Calley, reporting from the headquarters of SBAM in downtown Lansing.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at SBAM. And on Mondays, we like to start off the show by welcoming a new member. And today we're actually welcoming one of our new strategic partner members, the Michigan Franchise Owners Association of 7-Eleven. So welcome to Association President Ali Hadair and his statewide membership. We're welcoming them on behalf of our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. So Brian, let's talk about personal property tax. At the end of 2021, a deal was passed that increased the small parcel exemption for the personal property tax. And everybody's kind of thinking about taxes, so it's really timely. But what can you tell us about the increase in this exemption and how people can make sure they're receiving the correct exemption amount?
If you've been watching the briefing for a while, you remember this was kind of a big and unexpected win at the end of 2021 that made a change for 2023. So it was very, very late in the calendar year 2021. So when a bill passed to increase the personal property tax exemption, so the personal property tax is the business property tax on equipment, to increase the small parcel exemption for small businesses from 80,000 up to 180,000. Because it was so late in 2021, it didn't take effect until 2023. So here we are, but it requires some action on your part. So if you are a personal property tax payer, and well, every business really is, or supposed to be, the first 80,000 of your value, if your parcel was $80,000 or less, you were exempt from the personal property tax system. And it's been that way ever since personal property tax reform passed in Michigan back in, when was that? I think it was 2014. But that parcel exemption amount stayed the same, 80,000 year after year, until this year when it went up to 180,000. So if you are a personal property tax payer, so business equipment tax payer in your local jurisdiction, you can fill out a form, and if the total value of the property you have is less than 180,000, and you fill out this form, give it to your assessor. The form is shared in the link there. You can become exempt from that. That was actually part of a deal when the big business incentive package passed at the end of that year. They were looking for something to kind of balance, something to do for small business at the time, and were able to attach that as it went through the process. Here's the thing though, this form actually was already supposed to be filled out for this year, but it's not too late to get it to your local township or city's board of review, which is in March. So, but you have to, in order for the exemption to take place this year, you got to get it into them by this March. So normally, if you would have filled it out in December, January, February, you could just give it to your township, assessor. Now that we're past February, it needs to go to the board of review. So you should be able to still get that in. Please do take a look at it and consider whether or not you could just look at your assessment notice or your property tax bills from previous years, and it'll say on there what the value of the parcel is. And remember, this is not real estate. This is the equipment that you have on a particular parcel of real estate. If it's less than $180,000, then you will be exempt.
All right, well, that is going to be helpful for many people. Okay, let's talk about a recent poll from the Detroit Regional Chamber. They recently shared some results from this poll, and people have strong feelings about the value of a college degree, among other things.
Yeah, so there were the Detroit region. Our friends at the Detroit Regional Chamber do regular polling. They use Glengarriff for their polling, and I would point back to this last election when there were a lot of folks that thought that gubernatorial race would be close. Glengarriff and the Detroit News polling was right on the money, showed it at more like a 10-point gap, and of course that's how the election turned out. So they have a great pollster that does very good work, and so they ask about approval ratings on politicians and that sort of thing, but they also ask about issues depending on whatever's happening out there in the landscape and the policy landscape. So one of the more shocking outcomes from the poll was the level of value or the number of people that found a college degree in Michigan to be of importance, or they're calling it very important in landing a successful job. Only 27% found it important. 69 believe that a high school diploma is a minimum education required to be successful in Michigan. Of course, there are plenty of people, actually lots of entrepreneurs that don't have college degrees and went on to be very, very successful. However, there are a lot of professions, of course, that require college degrees. Statistically speaking, college degree means higher income, and the idea that it's fallen to that level in Michigan, it was a bit of a surprise. There's also there was also somewhat of a disconnect between consumer sentiment and about the economy and the actual statistics on the economy. But I think there's a pretty good reason for that. So, people generally had kind of a sour impression on the economy, both with the consumer confidence and whether they thought we were going in the right direction or the wrong direction. But really it comes down to, so unemployment is low, GDP ended up positive last year, but in income on the rise, but it's inflation. Inflation is that thing that really undercut the otherwise decent economic trend numbers that we see. So it's one thing for income to go up and for nominal income to go up, and also for unemployment to be down. But if spending power is diminished, well, then that means that that people aren't feeling as secure as those statistics would otherwise suggest. And in fact, I'd go a little further to say it creates a lot of frustration when somebody's paycheck, even if their paycheck went up, it doesn't actually have the buying power that it used to have. Another noteworthy thing, 65.9% of workers have a job that requires them to go in to the office. 21.7% of workers have a hybrid workplace, and 12.4% work from home. And that was also a little surprising to me too, that it has gone to a point where about 2/3 of workers are full-time at the place of work. Of course, we know there are a lot of types of positions in manufacturing, for example, and retail positions. You have to be there in person in order to do the work. It's just the nature of the work. But seeing that 2/3 are full-time at their place of employment, and only 21.7 hybrid and 12.4 full work from home, was a little surprising to me that it had really kind of gone that much kind of back to normal among how people explained their work situations.
All right. We talked a lot about childcare, and we know that access to affordable, high-quality childcare is critical to supporting our workforce. There's a new push to expand the Great Start Readiness preschool program, and while SBAM supports, preschool and initiatives, it needs to be done in a way that doesn't impede our daycare providers. So tell us more about this issue.
This is an area where it's been, I think, kind of frustrating for policymakers to try to find the right mix. How do you expand availability? We want kids started off strong in the K-12 system, and preschool can really help that to be the case. Want to aid with access and availability of high quality, affordable childcare. Preschool can be a part of that mix. But there are a couple of things that really that have to be done right in order to not have unintended consequences. The first thing is that you can't just assume that more people want to send their kids to to a public school style setting as 3 and 4-year-olds. It's just not. There are many places, many cultures, many neighborhoods and regions around the state where just parents are not comfortable with that style of a setting. And so what can happen is you can create a bunch more capacity, but it's not like if you build it, they will come. And so in some cases, what ends up happening is that you have people that you make more slots available, and people move from a daycare server into a public education, at the school type of a situation. And while on an individual basis that might be good, the availability of daycare overall can be harmed if you're taking kids out of the mix. So you have private daycare. If you take the 4-year-olds out of private daycare and put them into a public school, then just the financial model around private daycare is undermined. And if it's undermined enough, then you have fewer daycares available. So then all of those other parents that were relying on the daycare that don't happen to have 4-year-olds, that could go into Great Start Readiness now no longer have a daycare provider available. So this is kind of a delicate situation where you want to make preschool more available without undercutting private daycare providers. One thing that you can do is a longer term transition to help more daycares become Great Start Readiness providers. And so it could require some licensing changes and where Great Start Readiness, the types of settings that it could be offered in. Great Start Readiness, there's certified instructors and also a specific curriculum for kids in preschool. But it doesn't necessarily have to be done in a public school. There's a lot of parents that are more comfortable with a neighborhoods type setting, even a house type setting where kids are going to a home in the neighborhood. And there's a lot of high quality preschool that can happen in that setting as well. And there's no reason why Great Start Readiness couldn't be used in those types of settings. But that's a longer term transition. And so while it is overall early childhood education, of course, a very good thing. The idea of not exacerbating the shortage in the daycare system for everybody else at the time when you're trying to expand services for 4-year-olds, there is a balance there, and we have to be able to do both: preserve the daycare system, maybe even use the Great Start Readiness program to support the private daycare system. Maybe we can have the best of all worlds.
Let's dive into another tax issue. So in order to get enough votes for the appropriations bill, there was a deal to fix an issue on the sales and use tax. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, this was kind of a nice gift, if you will, that came out of negotiations last week on an appropriations bill. So on the appropriations bill, which set the $630 or so million additional dollars aside for that Ford project in Marshall, they were having a hard time getting the votes for that. And one of the things that has come up in the legislature, because there's a lot of strong small business supporters in the legislature, is they said, well, we don't want to just do that. If you're going to do that, there's got to be some additional thing that can be done to balance or provide something good for everybody else out there. Well, there's this issue that's been hanging out there since 2019-20, when there was I'm going to go ahead and say a change made in the sales and use tax system for delivery and installation charges that in the past, in most cases, were not subject to sales tax. So sales tax usually on tangible things, and then the use tax on some services. But sales tax and use taxes on it's 6% on delivery and installation. It really what didn't get assessed before, but something changed. There wasn't a new bulletin, but what started happening through audits, the Department of Treasury started putting big assessments on, like, for example, furniture companies who were selling, delivering, and installing furniture for businesses, including a lot of small businesses. Treasury was going back after the fact saying, you should have collected 6% on the sales, on the delivery of the furniture, and on the installation on the furniture. You should have charged sales taxes on that. And as long as those were separated out, back in 2015, there was a Treasury, a revenue bulletin, which said that as long as you separate it out, there's a separate transaction for sales and delivery. It's not part of the product itself. It's something separate from that. And something changed where audits were done, and they were saying, look, you didn't separate it out enough. Maybe because it was on the same invoice, you have different line items. And but there's a lot of things that if you ever had your car fixed, if you look at that, you'll see that on the labor part, you don't have sales tax assessed, but on the parts that go in, they do charge sales tax. But for some reason, for the sale of office equipment, for office furniture, for example, itemizing it like that wasn't good enough. And so Treasury started saying, hey, businesses, you should have been collecting 6%, go ahead and send it in. Well, at that point, you can't get it from the customer. And that's not a particularly high margin business. So for a lot, it was a really, really big problem for some businesses in Michigan. And even if they started collecting it, the sales tax, and all that does is shift that burden that didn't used to exist from the business who's selling the equipment to the businesses who are buying the equipment, which of course would be our members. So there is a verbal deal to get that fixed and changed. They are working on language on it, and we're hopeful that in the coming month or so that they'll be able to strike a deal on the exact language of how that works. It's not insignificant. Treasury is estimating it to be about $60 million in total taxes that they collect on delivery and installation today that would become exempt tomorrow. So there's some dispute on whether or not this is a tax cut or if it's clarification to stop a tax increase from happening. But either way, a good thing to get this off the table in terms of or in terms of charging a sales tax on a service that really historically has not existed in our state.
All right. Let's talk about the tunnel project. There's a new chair at the Tunnel Authority. What do we know about him, and what might it mean for the upcoming project?
So this is the tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac. This that would house Line 5. So Line 5 is now in the bottom lands of Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, where they come together, and there'd be a tunnel underneath it. There was an authority that was created back in 2018 to oversee the tunnel project itself, and it's a regulatory body. Basically, it oversees all aspects of the approvals and permitting and safety requirements and so forth. And it was never meant to be there are some proponents or some opponents said that it was like a rubber stamp group, but it's not. It's a real body. It'd be like the Bridge Authority at the Mackinac Bridge. There's an authority that oversees that bridge. Same thing for the tunnel. And Andrew Doctoroff is the person who is the new chair of that authority. And I think that sends an important message that this will not be a political body, that it'll be a professional body. He's an attorney, a very experienced lawyer. In large infrastructure projects like this, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a more experienced attorney on these matters than him. Handled a lot of the not the negotiation, but the implementation of the bridge agreement between Michigan and Canada for the Gordie Howe Bridge in Detroit. And I found him to be one of the most talented, experienced, and professional attorneys I've ever worked with. So by him being on that authority tells me that this is not going to be a political body. He's not a showman, not the sort of person that's going to do anything other than follow the law. And at least that's my experience in the past. So I saw it as a pretty good sign that that the Tunnel Authority is going to operate according to its original mission.
All right. I think it's time for Data Monday now.
All right. So this time of month, where we're at the beginning and the new statistics aren't really out yet. There's not a lot of new data that is available yet, but I always have a backlog of just kind of interesting things. I thought I would highlight a few of those to share with you. So the first is what's happening with job postings. This is really messy. By the way, 2 of these slides are extremely messy, but they're color coded to make it a little bit easier. And you can see the ones that are top, that are moving more quickly, and in terms of their increases. And you'll see that they're the types of positions that have specific certifications tied to them, or at least many of them do. So, for example, and postings, physicians, civil engineering, different types of therapy, medical technicians, dental, accounting. A lot of these that are in red, the ones that are the job postings that are going up the most, are very kind of require a very specific skill set, an accredited skill set. And then those that have actually kind of hit a peak, if you will, and job postings coming down. As you can see, those are color coded here in blue, and sales, marketing, media, arts and entertainment, IT, hospitality. Those seem to, at least on the job postings, doesn't mean that the number of jobs available have gone down. It just means postings going down. I thought this was a particularly interesting chart. Again, extremely messy, but when a bigger company does an earnings call, so they do a call for investors and media, and there's usually a subject behind that. And I thought this particular chart, which shows what those topics were, I found to be the topics of these calls were to be kind of insightful. So first, margin. So number one, the margin, like this would be profit margin. And margins are really getting squeezed as you have costs going up. This idea of featuring that as a topic of discussion with investors, but also look at number 2 on the list, reshoring. There's a lot of activity that today around taking supply chain processes and components and moving them closer to their users, so that you can take some of the guesswork out of the having the stuff that you need where you need it when you need it. So litigation was actually lowest on this, which I thought was pretty interesting. That it's not unusual for a company to do a call with investors to cover important litigation that they're facing, but that seems to be lower than normal. And then new debt issuances as well at the bottom of the list. So just kind of interesting that this information is not really available from small businesses. Small businesses don't do public calls with investors, but I thought kind of insightful that margin and reshoring at the top of the list, litigation and new debt at the bottom. And then looking at the earnings report, I think actually the picture here might be covering the most interesting part of the chart. But basically what this is showing is that jobless claims in Michigan, that the initial claims, which are in blue, that those are still pretty low, although you see a little bit of an uptick. A little less actually than analysts were expecting in terms of that uptick in new jobless postings in America. And then those ongoing jobless claims, unemployment claims, they're pretty leveled off, jumping around a little bit, but pretty well staying around that, between that range of 220 to 240, 220 to 240,000. And then this is the final the final chart, which again, just found pretty interesting given the interest rate situation. So it's easiest to get public data on residential mortgage interest rates, and at a time when those rates were at historic lows. So after the pandemic, the Federal Reserve dropped rates really low. They were putting a bunch of money into the secondary market, and it just pushed rates really, really low. You can see that the majority of originated mortgages out there in America today were originated between 2020 and 2022. So if you add up everything that from 2019 going all the way back, so mortgages that have been outstanding 2019 and older, that it's actually not as big a percentage as those just in the last 3 years. And then 2023, even though we're just, this data just has a month worth of 2023 activity, the 2023 will be a very, very low year for mortgage originations because rates have gone so much higher. So when we see the stats that show the changes in the real estate market, that while the prices haven't really plummeted, they're not going up like they were before. The interest rates would show that would have a lot to do with that, as you can see with those originations. And then also when you see people are staying in their homes as opposed to selling them. In other words, there's not as much turnover in the real estate market as before. So all that would speak to a lot less mortgage activity in the coming year until, well, throughout this year, when the Federal Reserve is expected to stop increasing rates here pretty soon, and then probably around the turn of the calendar, we'll start considering decreases, but I expect them to be fairly cautious in those decreases. So that mortgage activity that we saw in the last couple of years probably won't be back anytime soon.
All right. Well, thanks for that Data Monday report. I did want to let everyone know that we'll be hosting a short webinar this Wednesday at 10 a.m. About SBAM's pooled employer retirement plan. So if you're interested in that, you can register for it. If you're not able to even attend Wednesday at 10, we do send those who register a link to watch, but encourage you to check that out. Thanks again.
Let me say something about that pooled employment plan, if I could, Sarah. Sometimes that's a phrase. It comes, it's like a thing. It's like a legal term. It's like for a 401k for a very small company. And it doesn't have to be a very small company. It could be a bigger company too. But a lot of times a small business that doesn't have very many employees might look at just a hassle of setting up a 401k and the expense, the administrative time and cost, the liability that you take on. They can really push you away from that. With a pooled employer plan, a 401k with a pooled employer plan like we have, it is it's pooling a lot of small businesses together for the administrative and liability costs, so that you can offload all of that and still offer a benefit plan that is competitive and looks and feels like what a bigger business would do. It's through, it looks and feels like, if you were, I don't know, at the state of Michigan or working for General Motors or something, you'd have, these types of options. That's what this plan would be, but it's more accessible for a smaller business. So I would encourage you, if you don't offer that today and you're competing for employees, please do check it out. It's a lot more straightforward, I think easier, more cost-effective to set up than what you probably think if you haven't looked into this particular style, which became available when the Secure Act updates were passed a few years ago in the federal government.
All right, that was a great update there, Brian. Thank you. That is all we have for you today. Thank you to our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. Check out the webinar Wednesday at 10 a.m. and then we'll see you back here Thursday at 3 p.m. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.